Get out of my house. I'm standing in my own kitchen after 18 months in Afghanistan, staring at a woman cooking with my dead grandmother's skillet. Her husband looks up from my couch. Their kids freeze mid-bite at my table. "Excuse me?" she says, like I'm the intruder. "This is my house. Those are my dishes." She pulls out a lease agreement.
"We pay rent to Margaret Whitfield. We live here legally."
Margaret herself walks through my front door. White Lexus in my driveway, designer purse that entitled Smirk.
"Jake, you're back early. Property abandonment requires proper HOA procedures. Abandonment?
I was deployed.
Should have followed protocol."
I look at Margaret's smug face and smile for the first time in months. She has no idea what's coming. But by tomorrow, this whole neighborhood is going to know exactly what happens when you steal from the wrong soldier. Stick around. This is about to get very interesting. What would you do if some Karen stole your house while you served? Let me tell you about Margaret Whitfield, the kind of woman who measures her grass with a ruler and times how long your Christmas lights stay up past New Year's. Margaret's 52, drives a white Lexus SUV that smells like desperation and vanilla air freshener, and has been our HOA president for 6 years running. Nobody else wants the job, which should have been our first red flag. She's got that particular brand of suburban entitlement that comes from watching too much HGTV and believing she's the star of her own home improvement show. Before becoming our neighborhood dictator, Margaret sold real estate. Past tense, the state yanked her license for creative contract interpretations. Translation, she lied about foundation cracks, hid water damage, and somehow her commission always ended up mysteriously higher than agreed upon. The crunch of her high heels on courthouse steps became a familiar sound to her former clients. Margaret landed on her feet after her divorce, keeping the biggest house in Sunset Hills, a sprawling Mediterranean monstrosity with more square footage than taste. Problem was, maintaining an Instagram-worthy lifestyle requires actual income, not just alimony checks that had recently stopped coming. That's where I became her solution. I'm Jake Brennan, third-generation Army raised in foster care after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8. Bounced between homes until I enlisted at 18, determined to build something permanent for myself. The VA loan that bought my house at 28 was the first thing I'd ever truly owned. My place is a modest 3-bedroom ranch, nothing fancy, but every improvement came from my own hands. The garage smells like motor oil and possibility. That's where I restore vintage motorcycles on weekends. The satisfying click of socket wrenches, the sharp scent of penetrating oil cutting through years of neglect, the texture of rust flaking away to reveal chrome underneath. Those bikes taught me that broken things can be beautiful again. When deployment orders came for Afghanistan in January 2023, I followed every protocol. Automatic payments for mortgage, utilities, HOA dues. Asked Mrs. Fiona, my 70-year-old neighbor who still bakes snickerdoodles for newcomers, to collect mail and keep watch. I even attended the January HOA meeting before shipping out, specifically informing the board about my 18-month deployment. Margaret sat there nodding, taking notes, asking about emergency contacts and property maintenance. She seemed genuinely concerned about a soldier serving overseas. I should have recognized the predator sizing up her prey. 3 months in, Margaret spotted my grass growing slightly long. Mrs. Fiona was trying her best, but she's 70 and my mower weighs more than she does. Instead of offering help like a human being, Margaret slapped a violation notice on my door. The adhesive left a sticky residue that probably still marks the spot. When no response came, hard to reply when you're dodging mortar fire in Kandahar, Margaret escalated to abandoned property proceedings. She excavated an obscure HOA bylaw. Properties vacant over 90 days without formal board notification could be temporarily managed for community benefit. My deployment notification somehow vanished from the official meeting minutes. Funny how that happened. By June, Margaret had my house on Craigslist for $2,800 monthly. She installed the Rodriguez family, Maria, a nurse who smelled like hospital soap and exhaustion, Carlos, whose handshake felt like honest work, twins Sofia and Diego, whose laughter should have filled a home they actually owned. Margaret spun them a story about foreclosure and abandonment, showed fake documents, whatever lies made the theft seem legitimate. She pocketed over $8,000 in deposits and first month's rent, money that went straight into her personal account while I earned combat pay dodging Taliban bullets. For 4 months, Margaret lived off my stolen house like a parasite feeding on my service. But deployments end, and some of us don't come home alone. My first move was walking into the HOA office with deployment orders, bank statements, and 18 months of suppressed rage. Margaret's office reeked of synthetic vanilla and desperation. She sat behind her oversized desk, covered with real estate magazines and Cabo vacation brochures. Funny how someone managing community funds could afford to dream about Mexican beaches. "Jake, what a surprise," she said, though her expression suggested she'd been expecting this visit for weeks. I slid my deployment papers across her desk. 18 months in Afghanistan. Every bill auto-paid. Want to explain why strangers are living in my house? Margaret examined my papers like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics. There was the matter of property abandonment. You failed to follow proper notification procedures. I attended the January board meeting. You took notes. I don't recall formal notification. She produced a stack of certified mail receipts from her filing cabinet. We sent multiple letters regarding the 90-day abandonment clause. The postmarks looked suspiciously fresh, that crisp, just-stamped appearance you get when someone backdates documents. During my deployment, I'd learned to spot forged paperwork from Afghan interpreters trying to scam extra pay. Same tells, 2 clean edges, inconsistent ink density, dates that didn't align with events. "These are fake," I said. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" Margaret's smug confidence told me everything. She'd built what she thought was an airtight case, complete with fabricated evidence and legal-sounding justifications. She figured a traumatized veteran would accept her version of reality rather than fight the system. Big mistake. I spent 2 days at the county recorder's office, surrounded by the musty smell of archived bureaucracy and the soft rustle of decades-old documents. My grandfather used to say, "Son, when someone's lying to you, the truth is usually written down somewhere." He'd fought his own battles with crooked landlords after Vietnam, taught me that paper trails don't lie. People do. Margaret had never filed official abandonment paperwork with the county. The rental income never appeared in HOA financial reports. Most damning of all, her precious 90-day abandonment clause existed only in her imagination, nowhere in our actual HOA constitution or bylaws. At Veterans Legal Aid, attorney Sarah Rodriguez spread my evidence across her desk like a poker player with a royal flush. "This isn't just fraud," she said, the click of her pen punctuating each point. "Document forgery, theft, violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Federal prosecutors love cases this clean." Then Margaret made her first tactical error. Instead of laying low, she doubled down. Suddenly, the Rodriguez family, my tenants, started receiving harassment citations. Maria got written up for excessive vehicle idling when she warmed her car before dawn shifts at the hospital. Carlos received violations for unauthorized mechanical work after changing his oil in the driveway. Margaret was systematically targeting them for eviction, trying to eliminate the only witnesses to her scam. The neighborhood email came next. Subject: safety concerns in Sunset Hills. So, Margaret painted me as an unstable veteran with PTSD, conducting surveillance activities against innocent families. She included photos of me documenting my own property as evidence of threatening behavior. The character assassination might have worked, except Margaret forgot about Mrs. Fiona. My 70-year-old neighbor had been quietly watching Margaret's operation for months. When the defamatory email arrived, Mrs. Fiona forwarded it to every military family in our subdivision with her own message. "This woman is lying about Jake. I saw everything." My phone exploded. Tom Harrison, a Marine veteran from Maple Street, called first. "We've got your 6, brother. Whatever you need." Within hours, Margaret's narrative crumbled. Neighbors who'd believed her propaganda started calling with apologies and offers to help. The community Margaret thought she controlled was turning against her. That's when desperation kicked in. At 8 p.m. on Thursday, Margaret appeared at my front door clutching a cashier's check for $5,000. Her usually perfect makeup was smudged, her hands trembling slightly as she offered what she clearly thought was a generous settlement. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, extending the check like a white flag. "Perhaps we can resolve this quietly." I stared at the check. $5,000. Less than half what she'd stolen, probably what her lawyer told her it would cost to make me disappear. "Margaret, you stole $11,000 from a deployed soldier, forged federal documents, violated multiple laws, And you think 5 grand fixes this? Her voice cracked. I was trying to help the community. You were helping yourself to my house. The beautiful irony was that Margaret had just confessed on camera. My new security system, installed the day I returned, captured every word of her admission. Years of combat had taught me to always have backup plans and backup evidence. Margaret thought she was buying off a broken soldier. She'd just handed me a signed confession and recorded testimony. I handed Margaret's check back like it was soaked in anthrax. Keep your blood money. I want every stolen penny, plus damages, plus your resignation, plus a public apology to the family you've been terrorizing. Margaret's face cycled through colors like a mood ring in a blender. You can't be serious. I'm offering a generous settlement. Generous? You stole 11 grand while I dodged Taliban bullets. Your offer doesn't even cover half the theft. She clutched her Prada knockoff purse, knuckles white against fake leather. Fine. But you'll regret this, Jake. I have resources. Those resources apparently included dollar store Magnum PI, a greasy investigator who looked like he learned surveillance from watching too much CSI. Within days, this clown was parked across from my house in a rusted Honda, taking pictures with a camera that probably came from a pawn shop. Margaret's strategy was textbook desperate. Destroy the messenger when you can't dispute the message. She figured dirt on my military record would flip the narrative. Maybe a bar fight, disciplinary action, anything to paint me as unhinged. What she didn't know was that my old squad leader Tony Reeves was visiting that weekend. Tony had spent 3 tours in Iraq identifying insurgent watchers, so spotting amateur hour was like finding a lighthouse in fog. Want me to have a conversation with Discount Dick Tracy? Tony asked, his knuckles popping like bubble wrap. Better idea. Let's educate him about real surveillance. Saturday afternoon, we turned Tony into the most suspicious visitor possible. Dark sunglasses, mysterious duffel bag, obvious phone calls about packages, and equipment deliveries. Day when bargain basement Batman followed Tony to Home Depot, Tony bought zip ties, duct tape, and plastic sheeting, completely innocent renovation supplies that looked absolutely terrifying through paranoid eyes. The beauty was watching this idiot take notes like he'd uncovered the crime of the century. I could smell his cheap cologne and desperation from 50 yards away. By Sunday, Margaret's PI was so convinced he'd discovered a criminal enterprise that he called police himself. 2 deputies showed up expecting evidence of something illegal. Instead, they found Tony installing my new bathroom faucet while I organized socket wrenches. The zip ties were bundling electrical cables. The duct tape was sealing HVAC connections. The plastic sheeting was protecting hardwood floors from tile dust. Ma'am, Deputy Martinez told Margaret when she arrived expecting perp walks, hiring unlicensed investigators to stalk neighbors, then filing false reports based on their fantasies is actually criminal behavior. Turns out Discount Detective had lost his license 3 years earlier for this exact same stupidity. Margaret's intimidation campaign had boomeranged so hard she now faced harassment charges herself. But Margaret wasn't finished digging her grave deeper. The email war escalated to nuclear levels. Daily neighborhood blasts painted me as everything from PTSD psycho to domestic terrorist. I was stockpiling weapons, legally owned hunting rifles, conducting paramilitary exercises, motorcycle maintenance, and threatening community safety, breathing while veteran. Margaret forgot that neighborhoods evolve. 3 military families had moved to Sunset Hills during my deployment. Tom Harrison had organized an informal veteran support network. Mrs. Fiona had become our unofficial intelligence coordinator, her morning walks gathering more intel than the CIA. Margaret's character assassination hit a brick wall of people who actually knew better. The fatal mistake came when she tried rewriting history. Margaret began backdating HOA meeting minutes, creating fake board votes authorizing her abandoned property rental program. She figured manufactured documentation would legitimize the theft after the fact. Big miscalculation. Afghanistan had taught me that paper trails don't lie, only people do. My grandfather, a Korea vet who'd fought his own battles with crooked landlords, always said, "When someone's selling you bullshit, the truth is usually filed away somewhere official." Sarah Rodriguez subpoenaed the original HOA records from the management company's off-site storage. Those documents told a story Margaret hadn't counted on anyone reading. The real meeting minutes showed zero discussion of property abandonment, no rental authorization, no board votes remotely connected to my house. Margaret had committed fraud, then compounded it with forgery, obstruction of justice, and about 6 other felonies. She's basically created a federal case study in how to destroy your own life, Sarah explained, evidence spread across her conference table like battle plans. Every agency from local DA to FBI has grounds for prosecution. The irony was delicious. Margaret had launched this war thinking she faced one isolated, traumatized soldier who'd roll over rather than fight the system. Instead, she'd awakened an entire community of veterans who'd learned the same hard lessons about preparation, documentation, and never abandoning a brother under fire. Margaret wanted to play dirty. She just forgot that some of us had advanced degrees in asymmetric warfare. The real education was about to begin. Margaret's next move crossed the line from fraud into pure insanity. At 2:47 a.m. on Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a security alert. The screen showed a figure in designer yoga pants creeping across my backyard like a suburban commando. Margaret Whitfield, HOA president and aspiring felon, was breaking into my garage with what looked like a small plastic baggie. The infrared cameras captured everything in crystal clarity. Her fumbling with my tool cabinet, carefully placing something behind my motorcycle lift, the guilty glance over her shoulder before slipping back into the darkness. The acrid smell of my own adrenaline mixed with cold fury as I watched her plant evidence in real time. In Afghanistan, we'd use similar surveillance tech to catch Taliban fighters planting roadside bombs. Same motion sensors, same night vision capabilities, same satisfying certainty when you've got someone dead to rights. The difference was that insurgents usually knew they were being hunted. Margaret was so arrogant she'd forgotten that soldiers learn to watch their six. I waited exactly 90 seconds after Margaret disappeared, then called 911. "This is Jake Brennan at 1247 Sunset Hills Drive. My security system just recorded someone breaking into my garage and planting what appears to be narcotics. I need officers immediately." The responding units arrived within minutes, followed by Margaret's white Lexus pulling up with Hollywood-perfect timing. She'd obviously planned to discover the planted drugs during a convenient HOA inspection, then play the concerned citizen reporting criminal activity. Instead, she got to watch Officer Martinez examine the baggie of what turned out to be crushed Adderall while my security footage played on his body camera. "Ma'am," Martinez said, his voice carrying that special contempt cops reserve for the truly stupid, "we have clear video of you committing breaking and entering, planting evidence, and attempting to frame a military veteran. You're under arrest for multiple felonies." The metallic click of handcuffs around Margaret's wrists echoed through the night like justice finding its target. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks as the magnitude of her stupidity crashed over her. But Margaret's arrest was just the opening act. Neighborhood security footage of the HOA president being perp-walked from a veteran's driveway hit our local Facebook groups like napalm. Within hours, the grainy video showing Margaret's drug-planting adventure had been shared, screenshotted, and turned into memes that spread through Riverside County like wildfire. The real explosion came when other residents found their courage. Mrs. Patterson, our 78-year-old neighbor, revealed Margaret had scammed her out of $1,200 for emergency roof repairs that never happened. The Garcias discovered they'd been paying Margaret's brother inflated landscaping fees that never appeared in HOA records. The Johnson family had shelled out $800 in special assessments that went straight into Margaret's personal account. A clear pattern emerged. Margaret had been systematically targeting vulnerable residents for years: elderly widows, deployed military families, anyone who couldn't fight back effectively. Our neighborhood hadn't just tolerated a corrupt HOA president. We'd been living under an organized crime operation disguised as suburban governance. District Attorney Rebecca Walsh held a press conference that made Margaret's mugshot the face of HOA corruption statewide. This systematic fraud, targeting military families, represents exactly the kind of predatory behavior we will prosecute to the fullest extent of federal law, Walsh declared, holding up blown-up copies of Margaret's forged documents. Margaret's bail conditions read like a restraining order against her own life. No contact with Sunset Hills residents, immediate suspension of all HOA authority, prohibition from entering the neighborhood except for court appearances. The woman who'd ruled our streets with petty tyranny was now banned from setting foot on her own kingdom. But Margaret's desperation reached new heights of stupidity from her jail cell. Her lawyer showed up at my door 3 days later with a settlement offer that would have been generous if it wasn't basically a bribe. $25,000, more than double what she'd stolen, plus legal fees, plus a non-disclosure agreement demanding I stop cooperating with federal prosecutors. Mrs. Whitfield wants to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind everyone, her attorney said, sweating through his cheap suit like he knew he was delivering ransom demands for a sinking ship. I looked at the papers, then at Sarah Rodriguez, who was practically vibrating with suppressed laughter. "Tell Margaret she can take her hush money and use it as toilet paper in federal prison," I said. "I don't take bribes to cover up crimes." The beautiful irony was that attempting to buy my silence constituted witness tampering, another federal felony for Margaret's growing collection. Sarah forwarded the bribery attempt directly to DA Walsh, who added obstruction of justice and witness intimidation to the charges. Margaret had escalated from theft to drug planting to attempted bribery in less than 2 weeks. She was about to discover that some wars only end one way. The truth hit me like shrapnel from an IED, sudden, devastating, and impossible to ignore. I was sitting in Sarah Rodriguez's office, surrounded by bankers' boxes that reeked of decades-old paper and bureaucratic neglect, cross-referencing Margaret's fake bylaws against the original 1987 HOA founding documents. The afternoon sun streamed through dusty windows as I methodically worked through yellowed pages that felt brittle as autumn leaves. That's when I found the letter that changed everything. Dated 3 weeks after I received deployment orders, 18 months ago, Margaret had written to the HOA's legal counsel asking about procedures for managing vacant properties during extended homeowner absence. Her handwriting was careful, calculated, like someone planning a heist. The attorney's response made my blood run cold. HOA has no legal authority to rent, manage, or otherwise control privately owned properties regardless of owner absence duration. Any such action would constitute criminal trespass and grand theft. Margaret had received professional legal advice spelling out exactly why her scheme was felony-level illegal. She'd proceeded anyway. My hands trembled as the implications sank in. This wasn't opportunistic theft or a misunderstanding about HOA authority. Margaret had been planning to steal my house before I'd even left for Afghanistan. The paper trail painted a picture of premeditated fraud that made my stomach turn. Financial records showed Margaret researching rental rates for my street 2 months before my deployment. She'd contacted property management companies about upcoming rental opportunities. She'd even driven past my house multiple times, photographing angles and making notes about market appeal and tenant potential. While I was preparing to serve my country, Margaret was preparing to rob me blind. But the revelation that made me physically nauseous came from insurance files hidden in the deepest box. Margaret had filed a fraudulent claim 2 years earlier, reporting $8,000 in vandalism damage to community property. The insurance payout had gone to repairs performed by her brother's construction company, work that never actually happened. The bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth. Margaret hadn't just targeted me. She'd been systematically defrauding the entire community for years. Every elderly neighbor who'd paid inflated special assessments, every military family charged bogus fees, every insurance claim for non-existent repairs, all part of an organized criminal operation disguised as neighborhood governance. Sarah's voice cut through my rage like a knife through fog. "Jake, look at this." She handed me printouts from Margaret's seized laptop, a spreadsheet titled Target Assessment. Every military family in Sunset Hills was listed with deployment schedules, property values, and vulnerability ratings. Elderly residents were marked with notes like confused/isolated. Frequent travelers had absence patterns documented in disturbing detail. My name sat at the top with Margaret's handwritten notes. 18-month deployment confirmed. Property value $340,000. Rental potential $2,800 per month. Perfect target. No family support. Isolated. Extended absence. The casual cruelty of being reduced to a profit calculation by someone I'd trusted with my home's security made my vision blur with fury. Margaret hadn't seen me as a neighbor serving his country. I was livestock to be harvested. "This is federal racketeering territory," Sarah explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, organized criminal enterprise." Margaret's looking at decades in federal prison. The irony was perfect. Margaret's obsessive record-keeping, the same compulsion that had made her document every fake bylaw and forged signature, had created an airtight federal case against herself. She'd been so busy planning my destruction that she'd meticulously documented her own. Margaret thought she'd been hunting one vulnerable soldier. She'd actually been building her own federal prison sentence, one crime at a time. The first truck rolled into my driveway at 06:30 hours on Saturday morning. Tony Reeves in his lifted F-250, diesel engine rumbling like distant thunder across suburban silence. "Figured you could use some backup, brother," he said, crushing my hand in a grip that still carried 3 tours worth of calluses and conviction. By Sunday evening, my garage had transformed into an unofficial Veterans Reunion Center. The rich smell of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee and determination as old squad members materialized from across the country. Mike Fiona drove down from Sacramento with surveillance equipment that belonged in a spy movie. Danny Walsh flew in from Phoenix carrying legal documents and barely contained rage. Carlos Mendez took emergency leave from San Diego, arriving with a cooler full of beer and stories that made Margaret's fraud look like amateur hour. The sound of military voices discussing tactics drifted through my neighborhood like psychological warfare in suburbia. Margaret noticed immediately. Her morning power walks past my house became nervous speed shuffles as she spotted license plates from 6 different states and heard the distinctive cadence of veteran conversations echoing from my backyard. The metallic clink of tools against chrome, the sharp scent of penetrating oil cutting through morning air, the low rumble of engines being tuned to perfection. All sounds that screamed organized, competent, and patiently waiting. "Who are all these men?" Margaret asked Mrs. Fiona during a carefully orchestrated encounter near the mailboxes, her voice pitched higher than usual. "Jake's Army friends, Mrs." Fiona replied with the sweet innocence of someone who'd perfected strategic information sharing over 8 decades. "Such polite boys. They've been asking so many interesting questions about neighborhood history." The psychological pressure was subtle as a scalpel but sharp as one too. Margaret would peek through her blinds each morning counting military vehicles parked on our street. Sometimes 3 trucks, sometimes 7, occasionally none at all. The unpredictability was eating her alive, like waiting for mortars that might never come. Meanwhile, my legal artillery was positioning for maximum impact. Sarah Rodriguez had connected me with a federal prosecutor who specialized in military victim crimes, a former Marine named David Park, who understood exactly what Margaret had done to a deployed service member. Enhanced federal sentencing guidelines apply when criminals specifically target military families, Park explained, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "Your case is textbook predatory behavior. We're looking at decades, not years. In Afghanistan, I'd learned that the best operations combine multiple moving parts into one devastating whole." This was no different. Tom Harrison, the Marine from Maple Street, organized community security awareness meetings that happened to occur in my garage while 8 combat veterans discussed property protection techniques. Mrs. Fiona became our intelligence coordinator, tracking Margaret's movements with the dedication of a professional operative. The bitter scent of her anxiety was practically visible from 50 yards away. "She's making lots of phone calls in her backyard now," Mrs. Fiona reported during one of our coffee briefings. "Always looking around like she knows someone's listening." Someone was always listening. Mike Fiona had upgraded my security system with equipment that would make the NSA jealous. Thermal imaging, facial recognition software, audio pickups sensitive enough to catch whispered conversations through closed windows. Every visitor to Margaret's house was logged, every phone call duration noted, every pattern of behavior analyzed like enemy movements before an assault. Margaret's paranoia reached critical mass when she tried hiring private security. The company she contacted, Rodriguez Protective Services, happened to be owned by my attorney's brother-in-law, who immediately forwarded the request. Margaret wanted protection from military intimidation and veteran harassment targeting a law-abiding citizen. The security company's response was professional poetry. "Ma'am, we provide protection from actual threats, not legal consequences. Perhaps you should invest in better legal representation instead." By week 2, Margaret's confident arrogance had cracked into barely controlled panic. New locks appeared on her doors overnight. Security lights blazed around her property like a prison compound. Motion cameras sprouted from every corner, creating a fortress mentality that screamed guilt to anyone paying attention. Her morning routines became erratic, like someone trying to avoid sniper fire, different routes to her car, irregular departure times, constant glances over her shoulder. The woman who'd once strutted through our neighborhood like she owned it now scurried from shadow to shadow. The most beautiful aspect was our complete legal compliance. Veterans visiting a friend, neighbors taking evening walks, security equipment on private property, community meetings about HOA governance, nothing that crossed any legal boundaries, but everything that reminded Margaret she was surrounded by people who understood patience, planning, and the art of applied pressure. Margaret had declared war on one isolated soldier. She was about to discover what happens when you attack someone whose brothers consider abandonment a foreign concept. The real assault was about to commence. Margaret's first panic attack happened at 7:43 a.m. on Tuesday, right there in her driveway for the whole neighborhood to witness. Mrs. Fiona called me immediately, her voice crackling with excitement through my phone speaker. "Jake, you need to see this." Margaret just ran outside in her bathrobe, spinning around like a crazy person, counting trucks. I stepped onto my porch to watch the show. Margaret stood barefoot on her asphalt driveway, hyperventilating as she pointed at military vehicles positioned throughout our neighborhood. The sharp morning air carried the sound of her ragged breathing and muttered counting. 1, 2, 3, 4 trucks. 4 different trucks. What she was seeing was Tony's F250 parked legally on the street, Mike's Silverado in my driveway, Danny's Jeep visiting the Harrisons 2 houses down, Carlos's Toyota helping Mrs. Patterson with yard work, completely innocent activities that looked like a tactical perimeter through paranoid eyes. The metallic taste of satisfaction filled my mouth as Margaret stumbled back into her house, slamming doors hard enough to rattle windows. After months of terrorizing vulnerable neighbors, she was finally experiencing what fear felt like. The beauty was in our complete legal compliance. During my deployment, I'd learned that the most effective psychological operations never crossed legal boundaries. They just made guilty people destroy themselves with their own paranoia. Margaret's desperation reached new heights when she called police Wednesday afternoon, reporting military harassment and intimidation by veterans stalking her property. Deputies Martinez and Wong arrived to find what looked like a neighborhood barbecue in progress. The rich smell of grilled burgers mixed with motor oil and honest conversation as Tony washed his truck while discussing fantasy football with Danny. Mike was installing perfectly legal security lighting on my garage. Carlos was helping Mrs. Fiona carry groceries, the kind of community service that made neighborhoods stronger. "Ma'am," Deputy Martinez told Margaret after interviewing everyone, "these individuals are engaged in completely legal activities on private property. Being a military veteran isn't grounds for a restraining order." Margaret's voice cracked with barely controlled hysteria. "But they're coordinating. They watch my house. They're planning something." "You mean they talk to each other and notice things happening in their neighborhood?" Martinez replied, his tone carrying the professional skepticism cops develop for paranoid complaints. "That's called being good neighbors." "What?" The police visit backfired so spectacularly that Margaret might as well have set herself on fire for attention. Word spread through veteran networks faster than bad news. Margaret Whitfield had tried to weaponize law enforcement against military families. My phone exploded with calls from guys I hadn't heard from in years, all offering to visit if I needed additional community support. Margaret's second catastrophic mistake was demanding the HOA management company do something about what she called the military invasion of Sunset Hills. The bitter irony was delicious. A woman facing federal charges for HOA corruption was trying to use HOA authority to silence witnesses against her. The management company's response arrived via certified mail and community bulletin board posting. Margaret Whitfield is immediately suspended from all HOA duties pending resolution of criminal charges. She is no longer authorized to represent, communicate for, or make decisions on behalf of the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association. Margaret's suburban dictatorship was officially dead, but losing her position only amplified her desperation into full-blown hysteria. Mike Fiona's upgraded surveillance equipment picked up fragments of increasingly frantic phone calls, Margaret ranting to anyone who'd listen about military conspiracies and veteran revenge plots. The cruel irony was that her imagination was running wild with violent scenarios that existed only in her guilty conscience. What she thought were tactical planning sessions were actually discussions of legal strategies, witness coordination, and evidence organization. We weren't planning violence, we were planning justice, which was apparently more terrifying to her than any physical threat. When Margaret hired yet another private investigator to document military harassment, we decided to give her money's worth. Tony organized morning calisthenics in my backyard, perfectly legal exercise that photographed like paramilitary training. Danny conducted perimeter sweeps, actually evening walks to check on elderly neighbors that looked ominous through paranoid interpretation. The PI's report was a paranoid masterpiece. Subject coordinates with multiple military-trained individuals in activities consistent with pre-operational surveillance and tactical preparation. What he'd actually documented was veterans helping neighbors, maintaining property, and engaging in textbook community involvement. Margaret's attorney received the report and immediately advised plea negotiations. "Your behavior is deteriorating," he warned during a phone conversation our equipment captured with crystal clarity. "The prosecution will use this paranoia to demonstrate consciousness of guilt." Margaret's screamed response echoed through her house. "I'm not paranoid, they are watching me." Absolutely true. We were watching her. The difference was everything we did was legal, documented, and coordinated with federal prosecutors who appreciated cooperative witnesses. Margaret was learning that karma doesn't just knock. Sometimes it kicks down doors. By Thursday morning, Margaret had transformed her house into a fortress that screamed guilt to anyone with eyes. New security cameras sprouted from every corner like mechanical mushrooms. Motion sensor floodlights blazed all night, turning her yard into a miniature prison compound. The acrid smell of fresh concrete filled the air as contractors installed additional lighting and reinforced locks that could stop a tank. "She's lost her damn mind," Tony observed during our morning coffee briefing, watching Margaret pace behind her living room windows like a caged animal. "Look at her. She hasn't slept in days." He was right. Margaret's perfectly maintained suburban facade had cracked into paranoid obsession. Her designer clothes hung loose on a frame that seemed to be shrinking daily. Dark circles under her eyes made her look like a raccoon wearing too much makeup. The confident swagger that had once intimidated elderly neighbors was gone, replaced by jerky movements and constant glances over her shoulder. The psychological pressure had reached critical mass when Margaret attempted to flee. Mike Fiona's surveillance equipment caught her loading suitcases into her Lexus at 3:17 a.m. Friday morning. The infrared cameras showed her making multiple trips, stuffing what looked like financial documents and expensive jewelry into the trunk. The metallic clink of her car keys echoed through pre-dawn silence as she prepared to abandon her fortress. That's when Deputy Martinez's patrol car appeared at the end of our street. Not by coincidence, but because federal prosecutors had anticipated exactly this scenario. Margaret's bail conditions specifically prohibited leaving Riverside County without court permission. Her midnight moving operation violated those terms immediately. The bitter taste of poetic justice filled the morning air as Martinez approached Margaret's Lexus with professional courtesy and handcuffs at the ready. "Ma'am, where are you headed at this hour?" he asked, flashlight beam revealing packed bags and terrified eyes. "I'm visiting a friend," Margaret stammered, her voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. "With enough luggage for a permanent vacation? Step out of the vehicle, please." Margaret's arrest for bail violation made the local news within hours. Footage of her being perp-walked in designer pajamas while neighbors watched from their windows became social media gold. The woman who'd once ruled Sunset Hills with petty authority was now a public spectacle of criminal desperation. But Margaret's downfall accelerated when federal agents raided her house later that morning. The search warrant, based on evidence of additional financial crimes discovered in her computer files, revealed the full scope of her criminal enterprise. Agents emerged carrying boxes of forged documents, fake invoices, and financial records documenting years of systematic fraud. Margaret hadn't just targeted military families. She'd been stealing from contractors, insurance companies, and even her own elderly relatives. The sweet smell of justice mixed with morning coffee as neighbors gathered to watch the FBI dismantle Margaret's life one evidence box at a time. The most damning discovery came from Margaret's personal safe, over $47,000 in cash, clearly the proceeds of various fraudulent schemes. Financial forensics would later trace the money to stolen HOA funds, inflated contractor bills, and fake insurance claims dating back 5 years. Margaret's attorney withdrew from her case that afternoon, citing irreconcilable differences and client behavior inconsistent with effective legal representation. Translation: Margaret had become too toxic for even criminal defense lawyers to handle. From her jail cell, Margaret made one final desperate gambit. She contacted a local news station claiming to be the victim of military harassment and veteran intimidation. The reporter who took her call was initially sympathetic to a story about PTSD veterans terrorizing a middle-aged woman. That sympathy evaporated when the reporter discovered Margaret's federal charges, reviewed the evidence against her, and interviewed actual neighbors about her years of abusive behavior. The resulting news segment was brutal. HOA, President's Fraud Scheme Targets Military Families. Margaret's mugshot filled the screen while the reporter detailed her systematic targeting of deployed service members, elderly residents, and other vulnerable community members. Mrs. Fiona provided the most devastating interview. Margaret Whitfield is a predator who used her position to steal from people who couldn't fight back. These veterans didn't harass her, they caught her. The story went viral within hours. Margaret's face became the poster child for HOA corruption. Her mugshot shared thousands of times with captions like, "This is what happens when Karens think they're untouchable," and "Play stupid games, win federal prison." Margaret had wanted media attention to portray herself as a victim. Instead, she'd become a cautionary tale about the consequences of targeting America's military families. Federal sentencing guidelines for her crimes now included enhanced penalties for specifically targeting deployed service members. Margaret was looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison, and every veteran in America knew exactly why she deserved every minute of it. Her war against one soldier had become a federal case study in why some people shouldn't be messed with. The emergency homeowners meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Saturday at the community center, but people started arriving at 6:30. The smell of burnt coffee and nervous energy filled the cramped room as residents filed in carrying printed copies of news articles, legal documents, and 18 months of suppressed anger. Margaret arrived in handcuffs. Federal marshals had transported her directly from county jail for the court-ordered restitution hearing that would determine how much money she owed the community. The metallic clink of restraints echoed through sudden silence as every head turned to watch the woman who'd terrorized their neighborhood shuffle to the defendant's table. I'd spent 3 days preparing my presentation with the precision of a military briefing. Sarah Rodriguez had helped organize evidence into a timeline that would make Margaret's crimes undeniable to anyone still harboring doubts. The projection screen at the front of the room displayed blown-up copies of forged documents, fake invoices, and Margaret's own spreadsheet listing neighbors as targets. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying the confidence of someone holding a royal flush in federal court. "For the past 5 years, you've been living under organized crime disguised as neighborhood governance." The room erupted in murmurs as I clicked through evidence slides, forged signatures next to real ones, revealing Margaret's clumsy attempts at document fraud, bank statements showing HOA funds disappearing into her personal accounts, insurance claims for repairs that never happened, paid to her brother's construction company for work that existed only on paper. "This woman didn't just steal from me," I continued, the taste of victory sharp as winter air. "She systematically targeted every vulnerable resident in this community. Military families during deployments, elderly neighbors living alone, anyone she thought couldn't fight back." Mrs. Patterson stood up from the third row, her voice trembling with 18 months of suppressed rage. "Margaret charged me $1,200 for roof repairs that never happened. When I questioned the invoice, she threatened to fine me for questioning board authority." Tom Harrison was next, his Marine bearing rigid with controlled anger. "She tried to foreclose on my house while I was deployed to Iraq, claiming I'd violated lawn maintenance requirements. I was fighting for our country while she was stealing from my family." One by one, Margaret's victims shared their stories. The Garcia family had paid inflated landscaping fees that went straight to Margaret's pocket. The Johnsons discovered they'd been charged special assessments for community improvements that never existed. The elderly Williams couple had been bilked out of thousands for emergency repairs that were entirely fictional. Margaret sat at the defendant's table, her designer clothes wrinkled and makeup smeared, looking like a broken doll that had been stored in an attic for decades. Every revelation hit her like physical blows, each neighbor's testimony stripping away another layer of the respectability she'd used to mask her criminal enterprise. Federal prosecutor David Park took the podium to explain the legal resolution. Mrs. Whitfield has been charged with 17 federal felonies including mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, and targeting of deployed military personnel. Her plea agreement includes full restitution to all victims, plus enhanced penalties for crimes specifically targeting service members. The crowd's murmur turned to satisfied rumbling as Park detailed Margaret's sentence: 15 years in federal prison, 5 years supervised release, forfeiture of all assets including her house and luxury car, and lifetime prohibition from serving on any homeowners association board. Additionally, Park continued, this case has prompted congressional hearings on HOA oversight and new federal protections for deployed military families. Mrs. Whitfield's crimes have resulted in legislation that will protect future service members from similar predatory behavior. Margaret's attorney, her third lawyer since the original counsel had abandoned her case, stood to read a prepared statement. Mrs. Whitfield accepts responsibility for her actions and apologizes to the community she was elected to serve. I looked directly at Margaret as she was forced to stand for her victim impact statement. Her once confident smirk had collapsed into the hollow expression of someone who'd bet everything on a losing hand. Margaret, I said, my voice cutting through the room's tension like a blade through silk. You thought stealing from a deployed soldier was risk-free money. You figured I couldn't fight back from Afghanistan, that military families were easy targets for your schemes. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and Margaret's shallow breathing. You forgot that soldiers don't abandon their brothers. You messed with one of us. You messed with all of us. And now the whole country knows exactly what happens when you target America's military families. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the community center's walls. Margaret was led away in handcuffs, while an entire neighborhood celebrated the end of her reign of suburban terror. Justice had been served with military precision. 6 months later, I was standing in my fully restored kitchen, watching the Rodriguez family's kids play in their new backyard through my window. Carlos had used the restitution money Margaret was forced to pay to buy a house 3 streets over, a modest ranch that actually belonged to them this time. Maria's nursing schedule meant she still passed my house on her way to work, always waving and smiling like we'd been neighbors for decades, instead of reluctant co-conspirators in Margaret's downfall. The sweet smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled my house as I finished the renovations that erased every trace of Margaret's violation. New locks, upgraded security system, and a workshop in the garage where the sound of socket wrenches against chrome had replaced the bitter memories of strangers living in my space. Margaret herself was serving her sentence at Federal Correctional Institution Dublin, where her cellmate was apparently a former bank embezzler who found Margaret's complaints about unfair treatment highly entertaining. According to news reports, Margaret spent most of her time in the prison library, researching appeals that would never succeed and writing letters to judges who would never read them. Her house had been sold to pay restitution, purchased by a young Marine couple who painted over Margaret's beige walls with colors that actually showed personality. The Lexus she'd driven like a symbol of suburban superiority was now owned by a veteran-owned auto dealership that sold it with the advertising slogan, previously owned by a federal criminal, now ready for someone who deserves it. But the real victory wasn't Margaret's imprisonment. It was what grew from the ashes of her criminal empire. The Deployed Heroes Housing Protection Fund I'd established with my restitution money had already helped 12 military families fight HOA corruption across 3 states. Sarah Rodriguez had left private practice to run the organization full-time, using her legal expertise to provide free representation for service members facing predatory HOA tactics. Congressional hearings sparked by Margaret's case had resulted in the Military Family Protection Act, federal legislation requiring HOA boards to provide additional safeguards for deployed personnel. The law included mandatory grace periods for minor violations, protection from rental schemes, and enhanced penalties for anyone targeting military families. Sunset Hills itself had transformed from Margaret's personal kingdom into an actual community. The new HOA board, elected in a vote that saw 90% resident participation, had implemented transparent financial reporting, regular audits, and term limits that prevented future dictatorships. Mrs. Fiona had been elected secretary, bringing her intelligence-gathering skills to legitimate community service. Tom Harrison served as president, his Marine discipline ensuring meetings ran efficiently and fairly. I'd accepted the role of security coordinator, using my military experience to implement neighborhood watch programs that actually protected residents instead of harassing them. The annual Heroes Day festival we'd organized had become a community tradition, honoring deployed service members with scholarship funds for their children and support services for their families. The festival was held in Margaret Park, formerly the community green space, renamed by unanimous vote to ensure Margaret's legacy was one of cautionary remembrance rather than forgotten evil. Local law enforcement had adopted our case as a training example for HOA corruption investigations. Police academies across California now used Margaret's crimes as a textbook study in recognizing and prosecuting organized fraud targeting vulnerable populations. The documentary film crew that had followed our story for 6 months premiered The HOA Wars at the Riverside Film Festival, with proceeds going to veteran legal aid organizations. Margaret's mugshot was featured prominently in promotional materials, ensuring her face would forever be associated with the consequences of targeting military families. On quiet evenings, I'd sit on my front porch with a beer and watch neighbors walking their dogs, kids riding bicycles, families enjoying the community Margaret had tried to control through fear and greed. The rumble of motorcycles from my garage mixed with sounds of genuine neighborhood life, barbecue conversations, pickup basketball games, the distant laughter of children who felt safe in their own yards. Margaret had declared war on one soldier and ended up facing an army. The lesson was simple. Some fights you can't win, especially when you're fighting the wrong people for the wrong reasons.
15 years in federal prison. That was Margaret's withdrawal cause for turning Jake's deployment into her personal payday. You know what gets me about this case? Margaret had its own fingers out. Target military families when they are overseas, elderly neighbors who won't fight back. She's been running this scam for years, and it's worked because most people don't want to spend their Saturday afternoon digging through county records. But Jack, he comes home from Afghanistan, finds a stranger living in his house, and instead of losing his mind, he just starts documenting everything. That fake 90-day abandonment clause Margaret keeps citing doesn't exist, never existed. Jack's proof is with the original 1987 HOA bylaws, and when Margaret tries to plant drugs in his garage at 3 in the morning, well, turns out combat veterans know a thing or two about security cameras. The thing about bullies is they only stay in power as long as people let them. Margaret forgot that some fights you just can't win. Ever deal with someone who thought their little bit of authority made them untouchable? Drop your story in the comment. And if you want to see more cases where preparation beat intimidation, hit that subscribe button. Because there are Margarets with few in HOA owners across America, and they all need the same reminder.